There we go. We're live now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. I'm David Blackmon. I'll be your host. Stu Turley here is with us, from the CEO of the Sandstone Group and our wonderful producer of this podcast. Larry Schweikert is our special guest today. Larry and I go way back to 2015. We were both early adopters of the belief that Trump was going to win the 2016 election. We stumbled across each other on the internet back when I was running my own website. And we recently reconnected after having lost each other for a few years. And Larry, it's so good to see you, man.
Good, David. Well, good to see you and Stu. Dave and I go way back, and I've come to call David the Rush Limbaugh of energy in my newscasts.
Nice.
I wish I was that big. That'd be awesome. And Larry, of course, is America's history teacher. He's an author of a series of wonderful books. The most recent of which is, you can see in the background, is A Patriot's History of Globalism. And on the right-hand side is A Patriot's History of the United States, which Larry told us before we started recording is in its 41st printing, 500,000 copies. These are great books. He's a great writer and a terrific political mind. And Larry, I wanted to start by talking about my belief that over the last 50 days, we have experienced more major events of American history than we had probably experienced over the previous 50 years. And I wonder about your views on that.
I think it was Lenin that said there are centuries in which nothing happens, and there are weeks in which centuries happen.
Yeah.
And we've happened to come into one of those times. Whoever would have thought that a sitting president would have been forcibly evicted by his own party. Now, Lyndon Johnson, it was understandable. He quit because he wasn't popular. The war wasn't going anywhere. He knew it wasn't going anywhere. So he just said, I'm going to hand this dog excrement off to somebody else and get out of here. But with Biden, or Rutabaga, as I affectionately call him, he was forcibly ejected. And the word is, I haven't confirmed this in any written source other than the Hoax News, which you know is not reliable at all. But the plan was that either he resign as the candidate, or they would 25th him out and force him out as the president. And so Dr. Gilly, who is his main handler, said, Joe, we got to go.
Well, and of course, that's what Seymour Hersh wrote in his write-up on it. About, I like Mr. Hersh and respect him, but his reporting is also not the best sourced stuff, and you're left wondering what really is real and what may be his suppositions. And
was he the guy who said that George H.W. Bush climbed into an SR-71 and flew to Iran just prior to Reagan's inauguration? He was the guy. Yeah. Have you seen an SR-71?
Yeah. No, I
want to see a vice president climb into one of those.
Do you know what it takes to fly one of those things? Holy smokes. You got to be an astronaut.
I have flown the X-30 research plane, which was a hypersonic jet that the Air Force was developing from 1988 to 1995, supposedly to go 18,500 miles an hour through the atmosphere and then shoot up into space so that you could take it off and land it like a regular airplane. And so I flew the simulator down there in Fort Worth at General Dynamics, and I can proudly say I'm the only person in America who's crashed an X-30 simulator 3 times before they kicked me out. It didn't take long either. It was just...
That is fantastic. The simulators are really, really good. And I have successfully launched a Black Hawk helicopter off of a cliff in Wiesbaden, Germany, taking Hellfire missiles to the forward FARB, and successfully land and exceeded the flight envelope of a Black Hawk. So yes, they are fabulous.
Well, back to politics.
X-30, well, we'll get to politics, but you got to understand this, Dave, because I know you're going to love this. The X-30 was radical in every single way. It combined 5 different major aircraft manufacturers, which was Rockwell, Rocketdyne, General Dynamics, Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas, competitors, and they had what was called an open kimono, where they all shared their secret data with each other on this particular project.
Nice.
And it needed radical new materials in order to fly, materials that could sustain these kinds of incredible heats. It needed, obviously, a scramjet. That was the big failure. We never got the scramjet. It needed radical new fuel. And this is where you come in, because the program was able to manufacture, pump, store, and burn hydrogen, slush hydrogen fuel for the airplane, which was super cool in order to cool the airplane in what was called active cooling as you flew it through the atmosphere.
Wow.
It's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it, and five defense contractors' minds to it.
Yeah.
Actually sharing information, which has to be incredibly rare between those extremely competitive companies.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's go to, government, they're all government contractors, and we're talking about government and the future of our government. And boy, have we got a hell of a matchup in this election between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris, and really probably the most radically left-wing vice presidential candidate we've ever had, Tim Walz, who was picked yesterday, despite the fact that he's the governor of a state Kamala Harris was probably going to win in any event if she's the ultimate nominee, which Stu will get to in a little while. And over Josh Shapiro. And my theory is that literally the only reason why Walz was picked instead of Shapiro is because Shapiro happens to be Jewish and the Democratic voter base is increasingly anti-Semitic. Wonder what your view on that is, Larry.
Well, I think there's another reason. I think that his pick shows they know they're done. They know they weren't going to win Pennsylvania with or without Shapiro, and that's the election, because they're not winning. They're not winning Arizona. They're not winning Georgia. They're not winning North Carolina. They sure as hell ain't winning Florida or Texas, which are not even remotely competitive. So once it became clear to them, I think, that Pennsylvania was off the table, it became a matter of closing the hatches, trying to keep the ship afloat as long as you possibly can with as many electoral votes as you possibly can to save the electors who are still out there. And so basically they said, we're going to try to hang on to Minnesota. Now, I know everybody thinks Minnesota is out of reach. Barris doesn't. Barris thinks that Minnesota is always overpolled for Democrats. He himself overpolled Biden by 8 points in 2020. And we've had some polls showing Trump up 2, tied, down 6 or 8. So I think probably Trump is somewhere about down 1 or 2 in Minnesota. And so it all was going to depend on all those Somalis. Are they going to stay home? Or are they going to turn out? And if you put Shapiro on there, it's
right, exactly. Michigan too. I mean,
Michigan
he would have killed them in Michigan too.
So they traded Minnesota, and they hope Michigan. I still don't think they'll win Michigan. They traded those two for Pennsylvania and the election.
Yeah. I mean, she has to win Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, all 3, to be able to win the Electoral College. I think that's pretty clear at this point.
And I think they know they're going to lose Nevada this time around as well because of the Hispanic vote, and probably Nebraska too. I've seen registration stats in 2020. Biden won Nebraska too, that single electoral vote by 22,000 votes. The recent registration changes are Republican plus 13,000. So that means that they are only down in Nebraska too. Trump is by 9,000, meaning you only have to flip 4,500 people to win that electoral vote as well.
Wow.
So they're running out of electoral votes.
They really are. Yeah, they really are. And they're, I mean, there's scenarios in which New Mexico becomes very competitive as well, even Virginia under certain scenarios. And we've seen some polls before while Biden was still the obvious nominee that showed Trump actually leading in both of those states. And so there's a lot of time left. There's a lot of room for this thing to move in a way that could create a pretty significant electoral landslide, even though the popular vote's going to be still around 50-50.
Well, I think I think Virginia moves and Maine moves before New Mexico does. And the reason is New Mexico, although it's heavily Hispanic, which is trending toward Republicans very strongly, nevertheless, New Mexico is U-shaped. And it's got a lot of rich and upper class people at Sandia and Los Alamos and Albuquerque. And it's got a lot of really poor people throughout the rest of the state who are heavily dependent on government dole. And the middle class, working class in New Mexico is much smaller compared to similar states. So I think New Mexico will be closer. There's still a chance Trump can win it if the landslide grows big enough, and it can with Harris in there, the cackler. She will be able to turn a narrow defeat into an absolute landslide with the right conditions. Virginia is the kind of state that will really appeal to Harris's voters, because they're these upscale people who want to consider themselves liberated, woke, all the Nova people, and they're going to turn out like crazy. The popular vote got closer. I still think Trump can win the popular vote, but it got closer because of Harris over Biden, only for the reason that she's going to drive up the blue vote in California, Chicago, and New York. And those people are just going to go off the charts for her, whereas it won't change the electoral vote. If anything, it may ding the electoral vote by a few more electoral
I mean,
votes.
I think it, and in that, plus in other big states that are going to go Republican, like Texas and Florida and Ohio, it's going to increase the Republican margins in those states. Because I mean, people in Texas are just going to completely reject a Harris Walz ticket. It's done. And that Senate race involving Ted Cruz is done too as a result.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me make this point about voter registrations, because first of all, I'll do a little ad here. On election night, I'm going to be hosting a live election night webcast like we did in 2020. We had 800,000 viewers in 2020. We were sucking people off of Fox and CNN who are saying your coverage is better. We were honest. We didn't call any state early. We actually had Kelly Ward, the GOP chairwoman, walk into the studio just as faux news was calling Arizona. So we're going to do that again. We did it last time on a budget of about $30,000 and 2 weeks notice. This year, we're going to aim for a budget of $150,000. We've had about 5 months to prepare. So it's me, Ash Epp, and Seth Keshel. Seth has been doing a lot of work with voter registration. In Arizona, in Maricopa County, they update the registration numbers daily, which is almost unheard of, right? And you've been seeing a shocking, steady movement to the GOP, so that Maricopa County is now about +4R, and the state of Arizona now is 6.6R. It was +3 in 2020. And the Republican actual advantage is 262,000 net votes over the Democrats. So that gives us room for some fraud. It gives us room for some of the McCain people who are just idiots. And we still got Trump winning by 5 times what he lost by in 2020. But do
you think it gets us out of the realm or the voter fraud margin that Trump would have to have in Maricopa County? Because I mean, obviously, there's a 3 to 5% fraud factor. You got to,
well, like I said, he lost Arizona by 11,000 votes. And so right now he could lose that 3 times over and still win Maricopa County and win Arizona by 100,000 votes. But it's not just Arizona. This is the point that Seth and hard to say this time. Seth and I are making repeatedly. Is that wherever you can track registrations. Now, it's important for your viewers to understand there are states where they don't register by party. One of them is Virginia. That's why Virginia is always iffy. You never know. One is Georgia. One is Texas. One is Wisconsin, and one is Michigan. And those are pretty big and pretty important states. There are states where you do track by voter reg. Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa, New Jersey, Maine. Wherever we can track by voter registration, Republicans are net gaining across the board at shocking rates. In Pennsylvania, I think in 2016, the Democrats had a margin of 600,000 registered voters. Now it's down to 150,000. And remember, Trump won that state in 16 and probably won it in
Now,
20.
Scott
Probably won it in 22.
Scott
Yeah.
Pressler is in Pennsylvania working away, and we're closing the gap on Pennsylvania.
Correct. Right, which is why Barris, I think, has Trump winning Pennsylvania. I think most reliable pollsters have. Oh, I don't want to hear this, Pat. The Democrat illegal voters, fraud. We got to quit being McClellans. We got to quit being cowards. Our party is so good. Well, they're just going to steal it, folks. If you believe they're just going to steal it, stay home. If you really believe that, why bother to vote? If you really believe that, why even bother to register?
I mean, they're going to try to steal it. There's no doubt they'll try.
Of course they are. You know, the Prussians tried to beat Napoleon and he kicked their ass, right? So the goal here is not to hand wring it. Oh, they're just going to steal it. They're just going to add illegals. Right. Here's the thing about illegals. Okay, let's say they do manage to get 100% of illegals driver's licenses. They won't. Let's say they get 80% of them. Out of that 80%, how many they are going to actually get ballots for? Let's say 80% of those. Okay. So let's say out of that, how many of them actually vote for Harris? Because remember, Barris's stats showed that in Florida, I understand a lot of Haitians, a lot of Cubans, but Venezuelans and Colombians also do not like Democrats.
Right.
How many of those illegal voters are actually going to vote for Democrats? 50%? We win that game. All right, we win that game. So I say let them come. Let them come.
Stu, I want to turn this over to you, buddy, to talk about your conspiracy theory.
Well, I've got a couple ideas, and I just wanted to ask your opinion, because this is what I feel is going to happen on when we go to the Democratic convention. Here is Kamala Harris. Oh no! Let me start this over here. Oh no! And I have a feeling. I just have this gut feeling that she is actually going to get pulled, and I think that there is such a war for control in the Democrat Party that Obama wants her out. She picked Waltz because she's unhappy and wanted to prove that she could run her own campaign. And Obama is really upset that he may not get his fourth term. So I think she may not make it past the convention.
Okay, so this is Larry Schweikart's Mythbusters. Myth number one: Obama has not been running Rutabaga's campaign. It has nothing to do with Harris. If there's a book out there called The Truce, written by two Democrats about about Biden's campaign in 2020. Okay. And Obama's name very seldom comes up. It's almost always Anita Dunn, Jaya Paul, Jill Biden, and Ron Klain. Those four people were running his administration. And I'm not saying they were the only ones. You had these cabals. His presidency was being run by an green energy cabal, an illegal alien cabal, a war in Ukraine cabal, a just general destroy the U.S. cabal. He had all of these cabals that were influencing him. But those are the four main people identified in this book as really controlling his campaign and his presidency. Well, three of them got fired 2 weeks before he left the presidency, and they were replaced by two other guys that I keep forgetting their names, but their names are out there. They were replaced by two other insiders who were very close to Jilly. And obviously they failed. Now, I thought, and I predicted that he would hang on through the convention, because I thought, number one, they wouldn't be so stupid as to nominate Harris. But number two, anybody but Harris can't get the money. And they're already facing lawsuits against Act Blue for transferring that money to her.
They really are. And
so they've got big problems there. But here's the biggest myth buster. They're out of time. They start, I don't know what date your ballots go out in Texas, David. Your early ballots in Arizona and Ohio, it's around the 1st of October.
Yeah.
1st of October, okay? You got to print ballots, right?
Yeah.
You don't just, and they appear.
Yeah, they got to reprint them since they've got to change getting Biden off.
Not just that. You have to, so back up at least 10 days, give it 10 days to print ballots, 7 working days, right?
Right.
But you got to go back, because before you can print the ballots, every single candidate on every single ballot, and the ballots are printed by who? The counties.
Right.
Not the DNC, not the state.
Right.
In Arizona, we got 18 counties, 14 counties, something like that. You got hundreds of counties in Texas, right?
Right.
All of those counties have to be
227,
printing.
yeah.
How many?
Actually, 254 counties.
254. Wow. All those counties are going to have to be printing ballots. But before they can print the ballots, they have to print a proof ballot that they send to every single candidate in their county, to have them check their name, say, yes, I am running for Secretary of State, not dog catcher, right? So you have to then print those proof ballots. So that backs us up to right about the 1st of September.
And Pennsylvania's ballots go out September 7th. They start
They go out when?
September 7th, 2 months early.
Early
they have
ballots
2 months of early voting in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so now you got to back that up to now.
Yeah.
They basically have until the convention to start printing up the proofed ballots. So I see no way in Hades that they can flip her out, do all of the financial shenanigans they would have to do with somebody who isn't Harris, and still meet any of those deadlines. And if they send out early ballots, if they send out early ballots with Harris's name on it, and they switch her out, in some states, in Ohio, I don't know what it is in Texas, but in Ohio, they won't count the name that isn't on the election day ballot. So you could conceivably have 50%, actually it's closer to 60, but 50% of your ballots with Harris's name on it and 50% with Gavin Newsom's name on it. The Democrats would lose a 435 seat landslide.
Wow. Larry, let me ask this. What happens if we have Joe bumbling Biden walk up and is so mad at Obama that he wants to claim it back? Is that a possibility?
That would be fun. That would be so
great?
much. Oh gosh, I could see him wanting. Of course, Jilly'd have to be out there pointing him in the right direction like a toddler. And he finally gets to the podium and he goes, "I'm not giving it up. Who's going to throw me out? Just tell me who, you know." And that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and they already have the proof ballots printed up with his name, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and they've already got all those ballots printed up with Biden's name on them.
They have. They've had
but they also have Harris's name as the running mate.
Who?
They would also have Kamala Harris's name as the vice presidential candidate.
That's right. And neither of them would be eligible to run. I mean, people forget that we do have a structure of elections, that they're just going to cheat. Of course they're going to cheat. Oh, they're just going to do this. We got to quit acting like they're gods or superheroes or Thor or Iron Man or something. They can't just do what they want. And it's not a matter of they won't try. It's a matter of there are structures in place that even they can't change.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think that's, it's all difficult, but the shenanigans, what I told Stu before we started recording this morning is literally nothing would surprise me anymore after the last 50 days. Nothing that happens.
They tried to kill a president.
Right. I mean, and we haven't even gotten to that yet. I mean, the Secret Service, I mean, what do you think of this? I mean, it gets worse every day with the Secret Service. This scandal is not going away.
No,
even though the media obviously is trying to make it go away at this point. But the scandal inside the Secret Service is so shocking. I just can't see how it just gets buried, a memory hold like the media is trying to do. What do you think?
Well, can I take just a second, since I'm a historian, and explain to you the history of how the media got so biased?
Oh, God.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've always been biased.
Yes, they have.
The media, as we know it today, modern newspapers were created in the late 1820s by Martin Van Buren, whom I call the most important man in American history that nobody's ever heard of. And he's important not because he was president, but because he was a New York assemblyman who saw the Missouri Compromise as starting a civil war, because he saw a time based on the compromise that all those states above the Missouri Compromise line were going to be free states. And when they came in as free states, sooner or later, they would vote to abolish slavery. Yeah. And at that point, you were going to have a civil war. So he starts a brand new political party called the Democrats. This is why I can say there's no such thing as a good Democrat, because you cannot have good fruit from a bad tree. Jesus said that, I didn't. And so the whole Democrat Party is a bad tree. It can never yield good fruit. And so what Van Buren did to ensure that slavery would be left alone was that to join his party, you had to agree to shut up about slavery, not introduce any legislation about it, not talk about it. They put a gag rule in the House to prevent people from talking about it. But he went further. He bought and created dozens and dozens of newspapers, but they were not newspapers. They were political agenda propaganda pieces. 85% of them by the 1850s were owned by one party or the other. And back then they were honest. You had the Alabama Democrat or the Richmond Whig. They told you right up front who they were for. So their goal was not to publish news. It was to get people elected. And they would only print speeches and so forth, good news about their guys. And they usually didn't even waste time on the other party. That changed in the Civil War because of the demand for accurate information. Who won the battle? Did Johnny get killed? Right. And the penny press also came in at that time, in which advertisers started to make a very important push to be involved in newspapers. And they wanted to sell their products like Michael Jordan. You know, Republicans buy tennis shoes too. They wanted to sell their products to everybody. So by the 1870s and 80s, for the most part, papers entered about a century-long period of objectivity, where they separated the opinion, which is on the editorial page, from the actual news. And they actually tried to report news. And so I interviewed a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, and he had reported in the 1950s. And he was just amazed at how far the standards had declined. He said, when I was a reporter, there were three main rules of thumb that everybody had to follow. One, no unnamed sources.
Yeah.
Two, every single important fact had to have two named sources. And three, you had to always tell the other side of the story. Now, that does not mean if you're on Fox and you have a liberal on there, you don't get Karl Rove to tell Donald Trump's side of the story, right? You don't get Meghan McCain up there to tell the other side of the story. She is part of that other side, right?
Yeah.
So you have to get people who will explain your side of the story the way you would like it explained. That held true until about the 1960s. And then, and I'll give you your viewers a book to look at. It's called Partisan Journalism by Jim Kuypers, Kuypers. And what he found in a detailed study was that very slowly but steadily in the 60s, all the papers began to abandon those standards and move hard left. And he attributed that, we couldn't prove it, but he attributed that to journalism schools and academia. So why is the media so left? Blame the universities.
Yeah, no, I think I totally believe that. You know, I mean, these kids coming out of journalism school now are completely indoctrinated and have been for a long, long time.
And I'm going to be honest with you, Larry. That's the only reason my podcast, because I went to Oklahoma State University, but holy smokes, Batman. Our podcast with David and Energy Realities and the Energy News Beat is going crazy. People want real news. I'm not a journalist. Right. I'm a game show host, let alone,
What's your background, Stu? What did your parents do?
My dad retired as chief of staff of the 8th Air Force, fought in Vietnam, flew fighters. The F-4 Phantom brought him home.
What did you do? Have you always been
everything from worked at Intel, working with the groups that sold supercomputers and the retail side of the chip side of things. And then worked in the oil field, in oil field automation and that kind of good stuff. So
you're a white collar, middle class kind of 60s era person, right?
Yep.
Okay. So another point that has been made quite recently by Angelo Codavia is that not only are these reporters coming out from the graduate schools extremely left, but none of them have working class roots. And if you go back to the reporters who were active in the 50s, the early 60s, they were all working class guys. And Mike Royko, I mean, think of people like that,
Royko,
right?
Yeah.
And these guys who identified with longshoremen and with steel union guys, not with the elites. And the current class of journalists identify entirely with the elites.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's absolutely right. I mean, you're right. And I've said it many times too, that the media has never been impartial. It's only pretended to during certain periods of time. And I'm afraid what we're in danger of now is what happened during the yellow journalism period of time in the 1890s, when literally newspapers in New York City basically got the United States involved in the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, the Yellow Journal newspapers of New York City involved the United States in a shooting war.
The World, the Hearst World, but those were exceptions.
Pulitzer's paper was the.
Those are real exceptions in this period, largely because what did newspapers need in order to stay alive at that time? Subscriptions. And after the Civil War, based on the penny press, they went from being party money dominated, where your only source of revenue was from the political parties, to by the late 1800s being entirely driven by subscriptions, which paid all your bills. Those subscriptions are gone now. Almost no newspaper or news organization. I'll never forget, and this stunned me, in the mid-1980s, I was wrapping up my PhD at UC Santa Barbara. And for some reason, because I was older, because I'd been playing rock and roll for 10 years, right, before I came back to school, they put me in charge of a William F. Buckley fundraiser event. So we brought William F. Buckley Jr. to Santa Barbara, and I introduced him. And I had a chance to speak with him at length. And he said that National Review, that the only reason he did those speeches was to fund National Review, because he said it wouldn't make it on subscriptions.
Yeah.
In the 80s.
I agree with that. And of course, we're seeing it now. I mean, the news media jobs are falling apart. Axios laid off 50 people yesterday.
That was my feel-good story of the day in my news.
I mean, I have no sympathy for any of them. I just have zero sympathy for it.
Right.
And I mean, always have hated to see anyone lose their job. But in the, I make an exception in these propaganda media sites, because that's what they are. They're just pure
lying
propaganda.
Communist. You deserve to lose your job.
Yeah. I mean,
well, that brings us kind of to the universities, and what will it take to reform the universities? And I don't think it's possible. I think that like the newspapers and the media, they need to be put out of existence. They need to be put down like a horse with broken legs, right? And we're seeing a slow erosion between 2020 and now. About university enrollments have declined by about 4%, but that's not fast enough. We need them to decline by 40%. And I'm convinced that the quickest way to do that would be to do something with the college sports programs. If you can take away the big sports programs and their revenue, which funds the whole university. I mean, it's interesting. All the years I was in a history department, I never heard anybody complain about University of Dayton basketball and paying the coach. Occasionally they'd make a snide remark about how much money the coach get, but nobody ever complained about all the money that was going into basketball, because it was coming back to the history department many times over, as well as sociology and English and all these other things that nobody wanted to take. Right.
Yeah. Most people think that the athletic departments are taking state money, like at the University of Texas. The University of Texas athletics program is one of the biggest profit centers in the state of Texas, and and is completely self-sustaining.
I think it's going to get worse now that the NCAA athletes can make money. It's just going to get absolutely worse.
Yeah, it's just.
Well, and they always should have been paid. I mean, these guys are, they're indentured servants or whatnot. Paul Westphal back in the day had an interim thing where he wanted to do college vouchers for all athletes, and say you get a 4-year X number of credit hours voucher that is transferable. But I think now you need the best thing to do would be to start to pay them. That would be step one.
Well, even back then, even back when I was in school, Gundy was the coach at Oklahoma State University.
Yeah.
Gundy was the quarterback. I was a tutor, and I tutored Dexter Manley for a bit. He could not read. He stole my exam while I was sitting there, and he miscopied my answers, and we got our test back. I thought I was going to get fired and thrown out of school for him cheating, and he got a higher score than I did because he miscopied my answers out of Dr. Jackman's law class. And Dr. Jackman goes, "It's okay, don't worry about it." I'm like, I'm going to get thrown out.
It's and same thing happened to me. I was
Dr. Jackman almost threw you out?
No, close. I was a student assistant at Arizona State when I was doing my master's there. And ASU, this is a great sports trivia question, by the way. And it may be different now because I haven't paid attention in the last 20 years. But up to about 2000, only 2 college teams, basketball teams, had ever had their starting 5 and the first 2 off the bench not only be drafted by the NBA, but start by the NBA. I'll give you one of them was Arizona State. Amazing.
Wow.
Any idea what the other one was?
Maybe one of John Wooden's UCLA teams.
You're warm, but think of another great coach.
Oh, over at North Carolina, Dean Smith.
Indiana.
Oh, Indiana, Bob Knight. Yeah.
Okay. University of Indiana had all 5 starters drafted and first 2 guys off the bench, and they all started in the NBA.
Yeah.
Wow.
So as a student assistant, I was called in one day because we actually had a flood here in Arizona that took out our bridges, and the professor of African-American studies could not get in to give his final. So I come in and I've got all of the ASU basketball players and several of the football players in this class. And I'm giving out the finals. It's the big room, maybe 100 people in it, and which is scary. And the 100 people are taking African-American history, right? But none of them would show up for U.S. history. Anyway, they're sitting there like this, looking at each other's page. And I told him later, I'm not going to confront Alton Lister, who's 7'2",
No.
Thank you for your test, Mr. Lister. And I told the professor, he goes, "Oh, that's okay." And every semester, my good friend was the dean of students at ASU. And every semester, Alton Lister isn't going to make it through this semester unless he gets 5 A's. And he named all of these great basketball players that everybody knew, football players. So-and-so's not going to make it unless they get 5 A's. Sure enough, next semester, there they are again. He's not going to make it unless he gets 5 A's. There they are again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but that was happening at every school, still is probably.
But Dexter was one of the nicest guys on the planet,
sure
and the
was,
school failed him.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part.
Right. And so few of those guys actually do end up going pro and getting wealthy. It's really a disservice to the athletes to just push them through like they've done for all these years.
There's a fantastic show on Netflix. I cannot remember the title of it, but you'd find it if you search. And it's about athletes who have gotten a lot of money, signed for millions and millions, or I think it's called Broke, and Bernie Kosar, for example. But many of them are just broke the day their careers are over. And one of the things is they didn't understand that they were only getting paid for the months that they were playing.
Yeah.
And that the summer months, they weren't getting a check, and they didn't understand, well, what happened to my money?
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean, and so many of them are just, they're folks that are naive. They haven't really lived outside very isolated young lives when they go to college, and then they get out of college, they don't really understand how the world works. And it's really been tragic for many of them.
Larry, what do you think the odds are in energy if how this is going to turn out? Because I feel that David said it best. We saw in the last 50 days more corruption that we would have not seen if we did not have X in the last 50 days. Where's the next 50 days going to take us?
In terms of energy or what?
I'm sorry, in terms of politics, because this is just absolutely crazy. Where do you think we're going from here?
Well, one of Harris's problems is that she is tied to all of Biden's policies.
Yeah.
Now, that said, clearly the hoax news media's strategy is to not have her do any questions, accept any questions, not have to do any answers, not ask her about any of her policies, to try to keep her out of do a Biden part 2 where she's in a basement somewhere so people can't see her cackle or dance. Two things you never want to see from her.
Or speak without a script. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I mean, the question is who makes more sense, Biden or Harris? But anyway, so are they going to be successful in being able to do this? She has had huge unpopularity numbers. Her numbers of disapproval are very high, higher than Trump's. And this is without any media exposure. If she gets media exposure, where's she going to be? So one of the problems that Biden's going to have and his advisors are going to have is what horrible things can they do that won't sink her campaign even further if they want her to win. And I think you raise a good question, Stu, is do they really want her to win? I think they'd probably be very happy to see her lose a landslide and lose a popular vote by 10 points. But if they want her to win, they've got to be, they can't start a war. You know, if they start a war, Trump walks in with almost every electoral vote, because Americans today are not in a warlike mood. No. Unless you're in Minnesota.
No, but I think Americans are in a, you know what, my theory is that every election cycle, presidential cycle, is either a status quo election or a change cycle. And I think this is clearly a change cycle.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why Harris probably picked Waltz yesterday is because her plan is to present change from the far left, right? Go even further left than Biden, which she clearly is, and which is hard to imagine, but she clearly is. And so she's going to pretend to be a change agent, just like Trump is, and the voters are going to have to make a choice and figure out which one they prefer.
I think that is her trying to stretch her wings and saying that she's running her own campaign away from Obama. And I think that that's going to actually come back. The Biden administration just put out $4.3 billion in taxpayer funded grants through the EPA for green energy that's failing.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's be realistic. None of that money will get into circulation before 2025. And the way government works, nobody's going to be spending any of that money. It's not going to affect the economy. It's just going to run up the debt more. Yeah. And when Trump comes in, in my book on Reagan, I came to this section where as soon as he was elected, one of his first days in office, his staff brought him this giant binder of executive orders from Jimmy Carter. And they said, Mr. President, please read these over and let us know which ones you want to cancel. So they come back in a day and he hands them back the binder and they're flipping through and there's no red marks on anything. They're, what's going on? They come to the last page and it says, cancel them all. And I think that's what you're going to see with Trump is bring him a binder of rutabagas executive orders. And he's just going to say, cancel them all. And these people have to know that these green energy idiots have to understand that they're not going to see that money. It's never really going to become theirs.
This is sustainable without it. Is the thing.
In relationship to the Biden administration and the Trump administration, President Trump had an executive order pulling grid components from China out. He pulled them out of the grid. There are 32 major interconnects from China that are huge, that control huge chunks of our grid. Biden on day 2 put them back in the system. They are now, in my opinion, capable of being remotely controlled by China thanks to the balloon and other technology.
Well, and Trump will pull those back out immediately.
I sure hope so. I am very hopeful.
All right, Larry, last thing. Before we started recording, Stu and I were agreeing that Elon Musk buying Twitter was probably the single most important event to preserve the First Amendment right to free speech in American history. What do you think?
That would probably be very close. I'd have to look far and deep.
Since the Constitution was written, of course.
Yeah. I mean, that was just huge. And it was almost unbelievable that he did that, that he said, somebody has to make free speech free again.
Yeah.
And he was the only person. Well, you think maybe Bezos and maybe Gates, and there's Buffett. There's 4 or 5 of them who could have done it, but he was the only one really who was enough of a risk taker. Bezos isn't a risk taker anymore.
No, neither is Warren Buffett, really.
Money.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. I just think it's just a hallmark event of American history, and we all should appreciate Musk for that, even if we do make fun of his Cybertruck from time to time.
So Dave, let me ask you a question. Where do you see Europe, particularly Germany, and some of these really green invested Euro countries heading in the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, they're headed for complete deindustrialization and fealty to China for their energy security, and that is not a workable situation. UK's in the same boat as Germany, and particularly with the Communist Labor Party now running the country. In the rest of Europe, it's kind of a mixed bag. France is probably going to be okay because they still rely heavily on nuclear and are going about expanding that fleet again now. It's all going to collapse. The wind, solar, electric vehicles. I mean, really, in the United States, the electric vehicle industry is on the verge of collapse completely.
Yeah.
Other than Tesla, and
now
they're not sustainable.
There's a guy I follow, Noah Smith. He's a liberal. Half the time he's right on some economic stuff. He's really, really good. He is a battery nut. He just thinks that batteries are going to save us, that we're in a battery revolution. What's your take on where we are with batteries?
Well, and people have been saying that for 30 years, that we're going to have this step change in battery technology. It's going to save the planet. And they've been saying it's just around the corner for 30 years now. And, if you could have that, because right now the stationary backup batteries for electricity have a 3-hour cycle time. That's essentially useless in any sort of long-term weather event. So you have to have a solution that has a 72-hour cycle time at minimum to really be of value on a power grid. And until you can get to that point, we're just spending billions and billions of dollars on something that doesn't really solve the problem. And the problem doesn't really exist in the first place because, you could just build more nuclear and more natural gas and stop worrying about the rest of it, right? Which is the sensible thing to do. And, but, batteries, I'm a skeptic on all that because it can't exist. It can't happen. It can't be funded without government subsidies. And the nation is near bankruptcy.
So where would be our leapfrog if batteries are not really feasible? And if wind and solar, we're not going to get wind powered cars or solar powered cars or wind powered planes or solar powered planes. Yeah. What is the next fuel down the line in 50 or 60 years?
It's nuclear. It has to be nuclear. It's the only
option. For cars and for planes and container ships.
Oh, hydrogen. But again,
the technology
if they insist on it being green hydrogen made entirely with renewables, you're never going to get there. You have to allow blue hydrogen to propagate, and you can run your automotive fleet largely on hydrogen. But the investment in the infrastructure for hydrogen is so enormous and cost prohibitive. I just think 50 years from now, 80% of the cars on the road is still going to be gas powered cars. Because
will we return to muscle cars?
Well, probably not. Probably. Dodge is about out of business already, and but companies are. You see Ford now going back on all these battery electric investments, and they're starting to make hybrids and refocus on their gas powered SUVs. So to some extent, they are going to come back because that's what consumers want. They don't want electric vehicles.
In '69. I got my first real car. My parents said, if you just wait, don't get a used car. You wait, we'll get you a new car. They didn't trust a used car, right?
Yeah.
But they probably knew me. I can't nail 2 boards together or change a spark plug. So, but anyway, I ended up with a 350 SS Camaro. And that my friends who were all absolute car nuts, They put in a tunnel ram with 16.5-to-1 pistons with a Sigerson cam with 456 gears. And I was turning, 14s in this 350 Camaro, which in a street race with one of my friends driving, actually, he flipped over a 446 Barracuda and utterly wiped it out. So being the smart guy I was, I took my insurance money and I bought a 450 horsepower, 454 Chevelle.
Oh,
and,
my God.
Was
that's a race car. That's a stock car.
Somebody just saw one of those at a car show the other day, and it was $500,000. If I still had that Chevelle, I could sell it for $500,000.
Wow.
Insane. That's insane. My mother had, when I was in high school, bought a 1972 Pontiac Granville with 455 V8 in it. And that car was the fastest car in Beeville, Texas, and she didn't even know it. I mean, that car was just a powerhouse.
My friend, who I could never beat in either my Camaro or my 454, had a Olds 440 that was an absolute sleeper. He had street slicks. He had a big hydraulic cam, and he had a board to 480. That thing came out of the hole like a funny car. You've never seen a car beat somebody out of the hole like that thing.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I think we're going to have to wrap up. You got a clock, don't you? No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I had an Olds Delta 88 that beat a Trans Am. It's amazing what Olds had.
Well, that had a 455 in it too.
It did.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Torque, torque.
Crazy. Crazy. Listen, I think Stu's got an 11 o'clock recording here. We're going to have to jump out of here.
Good to talk to you guys.
We need to do this more.
Sure. Anytime.
Come back.
Please.
All right. Good deal. Hey, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions here.